Hello and welcome to the Red Leaf Card, your home for Canadian soccer news and views. My name is Jacob. Today we have a special guest onto the show, and he's the Vice President for Media and Content for OneSoccer and the Canadian Premier League. And his name is Kristian Jack. Usually fans call him KJ. Nice to having you on the show.
Jacob, absolute pleasure. Thanks for the invite. Really looking forward to the show.
Nice to having you, and lots of drama and lots to talk about for might be for Major League Soccer for Vancouver Whitecaps and Toronto FC. And we could also talk and also recap for the Canadian Premier League, which was a fantastic season for the Canadian Premier League for Forge FC and Calgary FC. So Vancouver Whitecaps with LAFC, which was a lot of drama with basically with the referee blocking Alessandro Schoff, which I might be kind of correcting that pronunciation with his last name. And I know like lots of fans are always going to talk about that maybe it was the referee's fault on this side, but I think that reviewing that replay on the referee, I think that the referee did not know that he was going to hit that player.
Yeah, I agree with you, Jacob. I mean, it's crazy in this world of sensationalism, how quickly things can spiral out of control, particularly in the world of social media now. So, the game is played on a Sunday night. It's near the end of the game. Vancouver need a goal. The guy goes to take the shot, but as you can see, the referee actually notices the ball is coming in his direction and just starts to run away from the ball. And he didn't see the player that he collided with that you so accurately just pronounced really well. So, like, ultimately, I felt bad for the referee at that moment, but I think the key thing came right after it, where the Whitecaps still retained possession. And I think it was the defender, Veselinovic, at that point still had possession. So ultimately, the ruling states that if the referee touches the ball and gets involved in the game, then he instantly needs to blow the whistle, because he is the one who obviously has to blow the game dead so it doesn't become a favorable option for either side. So he decides at that point, I got out the way, I blocked the player's shot. Okay, that affected but the Whitecaps still have the ball. And so he let it play on, and then they lost the ball, and then LAFC took over and went down the field. And then the madness starts, right? LAFC score a goal that was eventually given offside. People are on the field. The coach of the Whitecaps gets sent off. And so it was a bit of a perfect storm that I felt a little bit sorry for the referee, who, by the way, had already awarded a penalty, a little bit controversial, to the LAFC earlier in the game as well. So the Whitecaps and Vancouver already weren't very, very happy with the referee at that moment either. So it was a difficult moment, I think, for the ref. I felt sorry for him a little bit. I think the reaction was far too over the top for my liking. I don't know what you thought about that, but ultimately, I saw people saying it affected the Whitecaps this season and cost them getting through. I think that's a little bit of a reach. They didn't actually score a goal in the game.
Well, as noticed, the first match, it really didn't do really well for Vancouver Whitecaps. It went 5-2 in that match, which basically I think that LAFC had a great team that had the biggest advantage in that match against Whitecaps. So you're going to have the second match, most likely, as noticed, it was going to be at home. I think that it was going to be the advantage for the Vancouver Whitecaps, but the whole drama came in with the referee, and then it after the match, you have the coach for the Whitecaps now jokingly saying Timmy Ford, which is the referee, like saying death threats of it, but he's basically saying that it was a joke, and he had to make a statement about this in the press. I really think that he was wrong of actually making a press with the referee. And yeah, it was really real confusion in that match. And then you have notice LAFC now in the next round in this. And I really think in that match will there be an investigation with the coach with Vancouver Whitecaps in that match, and that's something that the Major League Soccer might actually have to investigate. And I've noticed that the unit for the referees also didn't take this kindly for that. And this is something that some people should not take this actually negative for the rest. And I know that referees have to be in this atmosphere of really negative words.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think you made a great point in terms of the wording professional. Ultimately, the Whitecaps are expecting the referee to be professional, but I don't necessarily think some of the behavior was that way. I do think that there will be some repercussions for Vanni Sartini in this issue. He later apologized. He made a joke, as you alluded to, about if the referee's body was found, people might think it was him. People in the press conference were very adamant that it was a joke. And of course, it was not serious. The magnitude of the wording that he would have alluded to would say that it was certainly a joke. But the fact that that image was even put out there, I think was a little bit disturbing as well. So I don't think that would be the right thing for coaches to say. It also came on a weekend where, I don't know if you remember this, but there was a big moment in the English Premier League where Arsenal were very unhappy about a ball that looked like it might have been over the line and maybe not against Newcastle. And Mikel Arteta came out and slammed the referees as well. So it's a difficult moment in the sport where VAR and the officials and people like coaches have almost a self-entitled view of being the most aggressive people in the game that can say certain things towards people. And I certainly don't like it. It doesn't settle well with me. And often when teams lose, as both these teams did, we're talking about here 1-0, there are often other reasons why they lost that game rather than the fact that just that major one decision, as you alluded to. They lost 5-2 in the first leg, and I don't think they really deserve to win the tie against what was a better LAFC team.
Yeah, so I know that this time that Vancouver Whitecaps should actually now finally know that Vancouver Whitecaps, they are already now in the CONCACAF Champions Cup, as noticed, that this is more now important for them because now it is that time that Vancouver Whitecaps are actually a better Canadian soccer team. And they do. And I think that Vancouver Whitecaps could actually do really well in the CONCACAF Champions Cup. And I think it could go on maybe like the semifinals. But they do have, and they have to take a better route of tactics in that continental championship. It's now that time that they shouldn't focus on what happened in the playoffs. It's now the more competitive aspect at this time. So what do you think about this?
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, what you said about the CONCACAF Champions Cup is really important because the Whitecaps have become the best Canadian team in Major League Soccer. And the way that they played in the Canadian Championship the last 2 years has established them as that. Now, we can talk about how problems they've had in MLS and maybe not matching up with the best American teams, but it's hard to remember a time in MLS when the Whitecaps have been the undisputed best Canadian team. And the way that they played the last 2 seasons. So I think that's a great point, Jacob, that you made about going into CONCACAF and representing Canada, and what a chance they have, because they have been good in cup competitions. Vanni Sartini has I think, planned really well in cup competitions for his team to play at that level. And now in this new revamped trophy, this new revamped, CONCACAF Champions Cup, with a different way of a different path, it's more of a knockout football style. I think they have a great shot, as you alluded to, but those kind of things like that on the weekend, it lets them down a little bit. And I think there's people asking questions about whether they can get that true next step up that the Whitecaps fans deliver and deserve, because it was great to see, 30,000 people there at BC Place. That was pretty tremendous to watch.
Yeah, and it's really growing at of Canadian soccer. I think that it's getting there of Canada soccer. It's really actually growing, and it's now getting the popularity that, hey, maybe there is a market for Canada soccer, and maybe there's a popularity for having a Canadian soccer league at this point. And now, as mentioned, that the Vancouver Whitecaps, and during the past they've been in the playoffs, and I think that it was 2017 they were also in the playoffs, and who won the championship for that year was Toronto FC.
Yeah,
and now you're seeing a lot of how it goes, but now there's struggles with I know Club de Foot Montreal is always having struggles of making the playoffs. It's not really doing well, but now you're seeing Toronto FC having struggles with fans and how they're doing. It's really a big mess how it is, and we know that the whole drama with Toronto FC when they were in the Canadian Championship, it's not how professional fans shouldn't act like at this point. Now they're going after Bill Manning, that he should get out, and we know that it's really not professional I know it's always the fans' view of who should get out, but we've noticed that the whole drama with a fan who threw the megaphone to Anthony Kay. Now he's with New England Revolution, and now you have Lorenzo Insigne and Bernardeschi. It's with the whole drama with the coach, and now they have Inter head coach, which was a former TFC player,
right? Terry Dunfield, yeah.
And now you've signed a coach who was a coach for the national team for the women's and the men's, and now people are still asking some questions for Bill Manning to resign. And this is something I do question a lot, the whole managing for Toronto FC.
Yeah, there's a lot of difficult moments at the club, undoubtedly. I think, first of all, passion is a good thing. It's good that people care. It's not good when you see, as you alluded to, people throwing things. I mean, that goes above and beyond everything that is acceptable. But when you have actually a fan base that still care, you can see the comments flooded on social media accounts. I think they should be quite thankful that they have fans that still care, because the worst possible thing is apathy. And when they don't care anymore, and they don't want to spend their money on tickets, and they don't watch the games on television, and they don't care whether you win, lose, or draw, I think that's the concern. So at least they still have a fan base who care at the moment, and they're lucky. because 10 years ago, they had a fan base that didn't care because they no longer had that victory in their mind. Like you said, they won in 2017. So that carries a lot of weight. People are loving that feeling and they're chasing that feeling again. So they're willing to suffer and sacrifice through the difficult moments because they won. But that can only last so long. And as you alluded to, this 2024 season is imperative that they get it right. They absolutely have to start turning the corner and climbing up the standings and becoming relevant and fun again, and people enjoying going to watch the games. Because Jacob, as you alluded to quite rightly, I think right now they are in a mess, and you'd argue that this is probably the lowest moment they've had as a franchise. And trust me, they've had a lot of low moments as well prior to the fact that they won in 2017.
Yeah, and right now, this season, right now the whole stats: 4 wins, 20 losses, 10 draws, and their goal differential is -33. This is not a good season for Toronto FC, and it is a question for what was the problem? Was it the roster that didn't align with the coach of Bob Bradley, or they really didn't care that much if it was the coach that didn't live its expectation of being having that objective to win games.
Yeah,
And
I think for me, sorry to interrupt. I think for me, right away, you mentioned the players, right? The top 2 players, Lorenzo Insigne and Fernando Bernardeschi, you pay them so much money that they have to deliver on the field and off the field. And if they're not delivering on the field, why not? And what are they doing off the field to inspire? Like 2017 is the point, right? Sebastian Giovinco, Michael Bradley, Josie Altidore were the 3 highest paid players, and along with Victor Vazquez were the 3 best players and the players that carried the team to win big games. And if you paid the money in MLS like you are when you paid those players, these players, Bernardeschi and Insigne, they're paid money like they're first liners on the Leafs. And why is that important to say? Because the ownership group is the same. So they're paid so much money, and yet they didn't deliver. And so that sets a really bad example all the way through, in my opinion, to from top to bottom.
And yeah, and I feel like when we saw that they were paid a lot of money, like Lorenzo Insigne and Bernardeschi, it was like they didn't want to actually play like they were 100% at this point. But when we had Giovinco in Toronto FC, like he played really professional as his best. At it, Victor Vazquez, even, you had everything. The whole roster played like it was their last, and that's the feeling that that was their contract. That was everything that they had, and now you have what you bought, Bernardeschi and Lorenzo Insigne. It was like, well, that was. I don't feel like playing the sport anymore. And now you have Bernardeschi and Lorenzo Insigne, like transfer rumors that they might go somewhere else.
Yeah, I think ultimately you asked what the biggest problem was, and I think it's in recruitment. And I think when you recruit players at the highest level at MLS and you only have 3 DPs, and if you're willing to spend so much money on those players, they have to be more than just top players on the field. You have to get to know them, and you have to know, are they willing to be leaders? Are they willing to sacrifice? Are they willing to do everything possible for that city and for that team and for that fan base? That's what Giovinco did. Giovinco was built differently. He had that drive inside of him. He wanted to win every single game. You could see it on the field. And that's why he was so likable and why fans loved him. And you don't see that with the body language of these other two players.
Yeah, and even I forgot to mention Josie Altidore, which which he was always which he made the first goal for the finals. As noticed that he was like he was the hero for Toronto FC that won the MLS Cup, and he was such a sensational player during 2017. And now he's no longer playing for Toronto FC, but still fans treat him with respect. And now you see Javinko, still free agent. As noticed, he played in Saudi Arabia. Now he won a championship for Asia and for Saudi Arabia. He was the MVP there. And I think that we did have really good talent during 2017. Josie Altidore, Sebastian Javinko, and now you have Michael Bradley retiring now with Bob Bradley in Norway. So it's we feel like that 2017 was the time that was basically the great roster for Toronto FC, and it might be the time. It might be that this year was we had the wrong signing of players, and it's like you're stuck with something.
Mm.
And you can't get out of it. You would have to sit, and it's like that time you would have to transfer players to find a new player, or maybe from the reserves squad. And it will, and the fans need to know, just like from 2007, it took a long time to get better and competitive. It'll get more better in the next coming years of the season.
It has to, right? It has to. It doesn't. I mean, can it get much worse, Jacob? I would ask you that. Like, how much worse can it get? I mean, you would hope it would get much better, but as you alluded to, they still can't just transfer the entire squad and bring a whole new squad in. They've got contracts. They can't move players. So I think you're right. It will get better, but I think it's going to be a little bit like pushing up a big boulder up a hill, and you're not going to get to the top of the hill for a while.
Or even for that social media that went viral of Lorenzo Insigne trying to go 300%, and not much of the media was actually going there, and it felt like I know Gareth Wheeler, who mentioned about this, that the soccer media didn't mention that it was decreasing. I don't see the media that's paying attention to soccer media is decreasing. I still think that it's still growing at that point. I think that Gareth Wheeler went off about talking about Toronto FC when it was mentioning about Lorenzo Insigne's talking about with the media that who's going to put up 300%, but that picture really said words about it. But there's a lot of people that don't go to in person that much, but they go on screen. But it does paint a picture if it actually looks like that.
Yeah, it wasn't ideal. It wasn't ideal, and it is very difficult to see how different it is. Like Toronto FC used to have a lot of press conferences in November, and a lot of us used to go, and a lot of it wasn't great. But now it's very different, and Sportsnet camera was there, not necessarily personalities. TSN were not there. It's a changing world, no doubt. And for those who are covering the game, you just have to understand that a little bit more, and just keep working harder, because you can, find that road to cover it.
Yeah, and I really hope Toronto FC comes back for upcoming season, and they fix the roster and who they will recruit for it, and see how it goes for the upcoming season for 2024. But I would say to the fans, but that always been hating on Toronto FC, you're still going to have the World Cup being hosted on your field in 2026. That's something to be appreciated. That where Toronto FC is going to be, that has been playing. You're going to have Canada, like Jonathan Osorio that played for Toronto FC. There's a lot of players that are former Toronto FC players. So I feel like that Toronto FC fans should be appreciated about.
Yeah, I think obviously there's a lot to be positive about. Like ultimately, as you said, the appreciation is still there, that the team is there. Very exciting that we're going to get to host World Cup games in 2026. But the fans have to understand that the team is in need of an incredible amount of change, and it's going to take some time. And when you're a fan of a team, I cover the sport of soccer in this country, so I'm not a fan of Toronto FC, but I am a fan of a lot of other clubs and a lot of other teams in different sports. And I know that when my team doesn't win, I'm not just going to give up on them, because it's ingrained in you, in your heart. And, as I said earlier, win, lose, or draw, that's sports fandom. And it's a good, actually, example of what life could be like. It can teach you a lot of lessons, that it's not always going to be great, and you're not going to win every week, and you're not going to be lift the trophy every year. And TFC are fortunate that they've had that. And they're going to have to wait for a while now to get that back. But I do think if they are patient, like you said, they have the resources. They have a lot of things to like about. They spend a lot of money. There's a lot of things to be positive about with them, but they have to get to a point where during the journey of being patient, they also continue to find their voice, because I'm a big believer that fans are allowed that, and hold people accountable as much as they can, players, executives, clubs in general, to get better. Because if you're not thinking about the fan and what they're spending the money on when you're building a club, then you're not thinking in the right direction anyway. So you have to look towards them, and maybe the fans can certainly look towards the club to join them in unison.
Yeah, agree with that always. And if fans don't like what Toronto C is performing, there's always the Canadian Premier League, and see what it is. I know some fans, like for example Hamilton, people that live in Hamilton go to Toronto FC games. Some of them in the Greater Toronto area that has noticed that live near where York United plays still don't even know that there's a team just nearby them. And the Canadian Premier League, we do have a first division Canadian soccer league, and hoping that some Toronto FC fans actually know that there is one. But there's always the Canadian Premier League for 2023 to talk about how it went, as Forge FC is the playoff winners and Calgary FC is the regular season winners, and they will be in the CONCACAF Champions Cup. And I feel like those two teams are the right ones to be in there. What do you think about that, Kristian Jack?
Yeah, Jacob, I agree. I think ultimately they were the best two teams in the season. First of all, it's a pleasure that CONCACAF have given two berths to the Canadian Premier League. How great is that? Imagine it was only one. It's great that we have both to go at it and develop the stories and benefit Canadian soccer. That they get two spots in that. And ultimately, as you alluded to, it's two different rewards. It's Cavalry, who obviously play out of Calgary, who won the regular season by 13 points. And I'm a big believer, as probably you are, being a big football fan all around the world, is that league title is real significance. It's the culmination of a work of over 5.5 months. And so to reward somebody to win that, I think is very important. And it cannot just simply be, okay, you're the top of the league now and you're ranked number one to go into a separate competition where we're going to play knockout football and then we're going to decide who's the best team. I think the fact that the Canadian Premier League has two trophies, two honors, two spots is great. And as you alluded to, Forge winning the fourth title from the playoffs in 5 years is a phenomenal achievement. Bobby Smirniotis as a coach deserves all the credit that he gets. And I, like you, I'm really looking forward to seeing the draw on December the 13th to see who Forge and Cavalry will get in the CONCACAF Champions Cup come February.
Yeah, but in the Canadian Premier League, there has been some changes of the trophies. That you have a regular season trophy, which was the regular shield, regular season shield, and now you have the North Star Shield becoming the North Star Cup. So that was a lot of reactions from the fans. So what was your reaction of how it actually looks?
I think they made the right decision. I think ultimately, prior to this, they had the Shield, which was the winner of the playoffs, and they didn't really recognize with a trophy the winner of the league. And I think they've made the decision now to have two new trophies. It is the right way to do it. Ultimately, we certainly hope here in Canadian soccer that this league will be living a lot longer than any of us, right? So in 100 years, you have to go, okay, we look back at this year in 2023 and go, that was the year where they made sustainable change. And that was the year where the cup and the shield were born into existence forever. And hopefully that will be the case. There's no need to change it now. And I think the Canadian Premier League has struggled a little bit for consistency and trophies and playoff things as they figure out their way in their passage of where they belong in Canadian soccer. It's great, as you mentioned, there was a lot of reaction, and passion is always good. But this is the right thing. I don't think you can just stick to something that existed because it existed. If it wasn't the right thing, I think you should be okay to make change if you think that it and you know that it's the right change. And rewarding a regular season winner with a trophy is the right thing to do. Rewarding a playoff winner with a cup, I think, is the right thing to do. And you've got the differentiating now from the cup and the shield. And as I said, I think for decades to come, that will be the way it should be.
I think the Commissioner Mark Noonan did an excellent job of the trophies. As known as Atletico Ottawa actually won the regular season. I don't really, and it was a banner. Everyone knows, but I always question: did they get the regular season shield? And that's the question mark for the commissioner if they're going to get their regular season shield.
I think they will. I think they'll get them retroactively.
Yeah, and so we could recap all. So the regular season, I could also. So, what are your thoughts on how Forge FC's performance they did on the regular on their season so far?
I mean, ultimately, Forge, I think, admitted that it wasn't their best season before the final. They only won 4 of 14 home games. They struggled at times to get, unbeaten runs. They struggled at times to score crucial goals. Arguably their best player of the season. I think he won the player of the year from their fans. And he certainly won goalkeeper of the year at the league was Tristan Henry. And it shows that the goalkeeper was very busy to keep the team in games. He's a great guy. I was really happy for him that he got his rewards. But ultimately, when the playoffs came around, it was Forge season again, and they knew how to win, and they beat Cavalry twice. So there's something to be said about knowing how to win in big games. And sometimes the motivation wasn't always there, as they self admitted that during the season. But winning big games is another thing, and finding a way to win is a very special skill. And they found a way to win, and they found a way to win a game where they were losing in extra time, and they came back to win. So every credit that they're able to do that. And as I said earlier, I'm looking forward to seeing what they can do in CONCACAF.
And not just how Tristan Henry did, and Tristan Henry has the best. He did one of the best highlights of saves in the Canadian Premier League, and lots of people say that Tristan Henry might be a good goalie to try to do the major in Toronto FC. And people are always saying that maybe Toronto FC should sign Tristan Henry for it. And do you think that Toronto FC should think of signing Tristan Henry?
I think they should look at it for sure. I think ultimately the Canadian Premier League is a tremendous breeding ground for players, and goalkeepers, you need them to play. And ultimately, if you're going to sign a player, you want them to have played a lot of games at a lot of big moments. So, look, he's a local product. They know him well. And look, why not? As I said, I think the Canadian Premier League players, the very top level of players in the Canadian Premier League, and I could probably think right away of about 15 that could play in Major League Soccer today. I really believe that. And that's without the level of coaching that will come their way in that league, so they can progress and get better. The majority of these players are very young and are not finished products and have the ability to improve. So yes, I do think players like that should be looked upon as within Major League Soccer as players that they could sign.
I know Calvary FC, it's a breeding ground of signing players and transferring players to other leagues. So I think what's your thoughts on Calvary's how they are doing in the Canadian Premier League?
Yeah, I think they've done a tremendous job of developing players that can be sold on and not affecting their team too much. You think about the players that they've had at that team. Joel Waterman, who obviously went on to play for Canada, Victor Lattori, Gote and Tigny's been moved on. Arabin Pepper went to be signed with Luton Town, who are now in the Premier League. There are so many examples of it. They had Dominic Zator, who they groomed initially and then moved on, and is now moving and playing really well in Poland. So you'd argue that they have produced the best amount of players that can be moved on from the Canadian Premier League, and they've never shied away from that. And they've also developed a really good core group that they can stick by. And I think that's important too. And you look at Forge, the difference between Forge and Cavalry the last few years is that middle group of players who are CPL lifers, I suppose, now have stuck with them. And that's what Cavalry are trying to do now. But they're trying to develop that. Marco Carducci and, Charlie Trafford. And, there's lots of players that of that example of that realm. So Sergio Camargo, players like that have been there for a while now that can develop that core. So yeah, I think for me, they are an outstanding team and they deserve their trophy that they got this year. And I'm really excited what they can do. It'll be interesting though, Jacob, because they look like they're going to be playing a game in Calgary in February. So that should be very interesting to see. One, if they can make sure they don't get too much snow, and two, I think whoever gets to go there as maybe a Mexican team or an MLS team, they're going to be cold.
Yeah, and see how the pitch is going to be like. If it's going to be professional, it's like going to be brown. I know lots of fans are are just going to make jokes about where Calgary is playing, and it's just going to be a lot of snow, and where Alberta is, it's going to be it's going to be a cold area in in the month of February. Um, Halifax Wanderers has is been the biggest improvement in this season. And when they signed a former Vaughan Azzurri player, actually Vaughan Azzurri coach, and some Vaughan Azzurri player, Farron. And what how what was your reaction on Halifax Wanderers in this season?
Yeah, I thought it was a tremendous, successful season. But one that they were not satisfied with, which I think was great. They ultimately want to move forward and progress. They almost finished second, and they spent the second and most minutes in the league in terms of percentage of minutes being led in a game. I mean, they were on top of games more than anybody else apart from Calgary. Their away record, I think, needs to get better, and they will get that the more personality they have. They had 15 new players this year. So they had a change of a roster of an incredible percentage. And this year, we'd expect most of those players to return. So there won't be as much turnover, and which will take them to another step. And anyone who's not been to Halifax, or anyone who gets the opportunity to go to Halifax to watch a game, you need to go. Go to the Wanderers grounds, because it's 6,500 people packed into this little stadium in the city, and the atmosphere around it, and the bars and the pubs beforehand, and the walk to the stadium, to the park and the grounds is beautiful. And they believe in the team, that they represent that region. And that's what the Canadian Premier League brings, Jacob, is that what football brings is that they represent regions. You support teams because a lot of it is people like you, or wherever you're from, you go because they represent you. And so the Wanderers have done a great job of that.
Well, I'm actually glad that I saw a match this year at Halifax, and I'm glad that they have announced that of expanding the attendance by 2025, and I'm glad to see more how Halifax Wanderers see brings in the crowd in Halifax. And Pacific FC, the island of Vancouver, which was a coast to coast match, and I liked how that was a big rivalry with Halifax Wanderers and Pacific FC. It was really a great match with Pacific FC, but it was a drama in Halifax, and Pacific FC did really well, but did not compute in against Calgary FC, which they had a second chance to make the finals. So Pacific FC, what do you think about Pacific FC, which were the fourth place team for the season?
Yeah, as you alluded to, there's a lot to like about them. For the first half of the season, they were the best team in the CPL. Fun, adventurous, open, young players like Saloof and Sean Young, and obviously performing very high level. And then they stopped scoring goals, and they started letting goals in that were unfortunate. They had a young goalkeeper that they backed this year in Emil Gazdov. They were a younger team. They were willing to make more mistakes and let the young players live that. And so they finished fourth because they basically were the seventh worst team in the league in the second half of the season. So, look, I think they've got a lot of work to do, but I think that, Manny Aparicio being a free agent is their best player, and it'd be difficult if they can't bring him back. But, they're a young team, and there's a lot to like about that squad going forward.
Yeah, and also Pacific FC was the only team that actually won a championship for the Canadian Premier League against Forge FC, Pablo Ducal, who's also was the head coach of the year. And now you have a new coach. And I still think that they have the right coach for Pacific FC.
Agree.
And I still think that Pacific FC does have a good competitive team, but they still have to find a good way to win and make it do well. And now you have your fifth place team, York United. A lot of drama, a lot of situations going on with York United, and but they slide in to be the fifth spot for the playoffs, which they did have a battle with Atletico Ottawa. We could talk about that after. And York United, what's your response with York United?
Yeah, I think most people expected they weren't going to make the playoffs this year. And they had a talented roster, just almost a group of individuals, though, rather than a team. And I think they would, they had those 4 home games in a row near the end of the season where we expected them to go on a run and get to the playoffs. And they lost the first at home. Then they lost the second at home. Then they lost the third at home. And meanwhile, everybody else kept losing and keeping them in it. So they got to that fourth one against Atletico Ottawa. And it's like, oh, we still got a chance of making the playoffs. It was almost like, they thought they were done. But they had good players. They had players like Kevin Dos Santos. Obviously, Mo Babuli was a very important player. Clement Bahia was very good. And Brem Samaro, I thought, was outstanding for them in midfield. So they had some really good players, particularly going forward. Paris G had a very good game, another good season. Jonathan Grant. So they had players there they could rely on. And in the end, Martin Nash did a really good job as a coach to win that game against Atletico Ottawa late again in the game with another late goal conceded by Atletico Ottawa, as you mentioned. That was their downfall. We'll get to them. But York United did a great job, and they almost won the playoff game. I was there. They went to Vancouver Island, and they lost that one game, 90th minute, right at the very end. And they, if they'd have stayed in that game and they stayed in the playoffs, they would have been a very difficult out, I think.
Yeah, and I actually got to see that match with York United and Atletico Ottawa. I thought that it was going to be a scoreless game, but as you mentioned, Kevin Dos Santos made the game winner in the 89th minute. The it was a great match that Kevin Dos Santos for York United did a wonderful historic goal for York United, and all the fans are going to recognize that goal for York United. And now, as noticed, York United does have a ownership situation, but I've heard sources there is going to it could be Liga MX ownership, and I think what's your reaction of that source of there could be a Liga MX ownership for York United?
Yeah, I don't know too much about it, to be honest, so it's hard for me to speak about it, but I'll say that it's great that an ownership group is going to come in and revitalize the team. We need a team in that region to do well. We need teams in the GTA to be represented in the Canadian Premier League. And I think that there's a lot of things to like about that club going forward, that they could be arguably the best team in the Canadian Premier League with the amount of resources and the amount of players in that region that you can tap into. There's a lot of things going that they have going for them. They already have 2 teams in the province with Forge of Hamilton and Atletico Ottawa in the nation's capital. It reduces the travel a little bit. There's a lot of things, as I said, that can be positive for them. And hopefully this is the start of a brand new chapter.
Yeah, I hope that York United finds their good ownership and see how the next chapter goes for York United. But at least there's another team that is big, is Atletico Ottawa, which came 6th, big drama, and with York United for the battle of 5th. But it was kind of lots of fans expect that it was not a good performance for Atletico Ottawa, and lots of people usually thought that Atletico Ottawa was going to be the big performer of the team. Um, for me, I thought that Atletico Ottawa for this season was not going to do really well because of their roster for in the off season.
Hmm.
So they got rid of Balu Tabla and some other good players, but they did have some good players that they've got from CF Montreal, Jean Arelasi, which was a good one, but um, they they brought in an experienced player, Alberto Zabator, which was the mid of the season, which I think that was um, too late for Atletico Ottawa, and the whole the whole roster um, kind of did not. I've heard Nathan Ingham basically said in the press that there was no leadership for the team, and I kind of agree with that what he said. And so, what do you think about Atletico Ottawa?
Yeah, I think you got it all right. I think the analysis that you mentioned it um, is very accurate. You know, ultimately they lost Sissoko as well. It was a big time midfielder for them in 2022. Their recruitment, they didn't get quite right. And I think that Atletico Ottawa fans were hoping that the next step would be the evolution of attacking football, that they were more defensive for a reason in 2022 because that was the best route to success. And then the next step forward would be, okay, now let's have a little bit more openness and fluid football and score more goals. And they just couldn't score goals. They could not score goals properly. And so that very thin line between success and failure was there because the teams were always very close. And so when they would give goals away, very often they would turn into losses because they couldn't score. And so, you know, Bassett being their best player, Ollie Bassett, they tried him in different positions in a front three and different things, but ultimately they couldn't get the best out of him and the best out of their attack. And they've got a lot of work to do. They just re-signed Carlos Gonzalez to another year. And so I think that they will look at putting together pieces to make them a more of a dynamic attacking team.
Yeah, and you mentioned Ollie Bassett. As noticed, he's won the Golden Boot, but it was basically a draw with Bevan, with that plays for Calgary FC, and I don't think that Ollie Bassett didn't have a good performance this season. I think that previous season he had a great season, so it does question for Atletico Ottawa. Um, what's the next step for the roster for Atletico for the next season? But the bad thing about Atletico Ottawa, they do some of the players are contract expired. One of the key players is Nathan Mingham and Sean Melvin. Their goalies out of contract. A lot of them. So it is a big signing to try to find good players for Atletico Ottawa, and it is a big hill to climb to sign players for Atletico Ottawa. So that's it's everywhere for Atletico Ottawa who to sign.
Yeah, they got the resources of Atletico Madrid. They've got the Spanish connection there. Obviously, there's some players that are out of contract that I think would like to be back. You mentioned maybe a couple of the goalkeepers. We'll see whether they bring one of those back. So it's one of those where they don't want to rip it up, Jacob. They don't want to dismantle everything and restart. They need to figure out how to keep some of the core there. And as I said, I think find a different way to play and try and open teams up and be more dynamic. If they're going to survive in this league, they've got to score more goals.
Yeah, I also agree. But now the expansion team, Vancouver FC, kind of a great performance for them, and they do deserve a lot of credit so much for expansion team. And this was also the same performance how Atletico Ottawa did when they came. They were 7 spots in the Island games, and now Vancouver FC did a was, my opinion, the best expansion team they've in the season. So I would have to give so much credit how Vancouver FC the coach did, and as noticed, there's a lot to talk about it. Vancouver FC, they're miss. I think people from don't mention Vancouver FC needs to watch Vancouver FC how they play.
Yeah, I agree. They did really well, didn't they? I mean, ultimately, it's never easy. It's an expansion team. They got rid of quite a few players during the season. They recognized early that some of the players they weren't happy with, they need to move on. And there's a bit of turnover, but I think in a positive way. I was just grabbing my notebook there because I wanted to just remind myself, and I thought I was right, but they got 16 points, I think, from the last 11 games. And so like they were, you know, one of the top teams in the league in points in the first 15 minutes of games. They were very, very good in aspects. They beat York for their first game at home. They beat Pacific, their rivals, which was so fun to see them be able to do that twice, both at home and away. They had a lot of positives. James Cameron was nominated as under 21 player of the year, player who was in tryouts at the beginning of the season. Callum Irving was a fantastic captain. They brought in some players like Vasco Fry, Renan Garcia, Alejandro Diaz, Mickey Cantav. They changed the roster on the fly and adapted to the Canadian Premier League well. So I think they're an exciting team to keep an eye on. And like you, I would not sleep on them for a potential playoff spot next year.
Yeah, when I thought about Vancouver FC, if they were last spots, they were not really of a good performance team on during like the mid ending of the season, but they did really well to try to catch up. And as noticed that could mention FC Edmonton, that they've actually beated the worst performance of how many points they've made. And Vancouver FC did really well to bounce back, and it went really well to see Vancouver FC. I see a lot of potential of it, and I hope to see how next season goes for Vancouver FC, and hoping that they make the top 5 or mostly near 5th spot.
Yeah, just to be competitive, right? That's the key.
Yeah, and right now I've heard that they've announced that Sean Hundell will not be in Vancouver FC, and it is a big loss for Vancouver FC because he was the most liked player for the team, and hoping the off season for Vancouver FC will be getting better players for next season. So yeah, big credit for Vancouver FC. And now I would say last place, Valor FC, which, my opinion, the worst Canadian Premier League team for this season, didn't do well in the Canadian Championship, who lost to a semi-pro team for League One BC, TSS Rovers, and now having troubles with their tactics in this season. And I do feel sorry about Valor FC. It really does question how Valor FC will bounce back for the upcoming seasons, it it's not it doesn't look good for Valor FC, because I know that Phil Dos Santos, he was the coach for the Vancouver Whitecaps, and he got fired when they lost to Pacific FC, and now he's with Valor FC, and he lost to us to TSS Rovers, and it does question now fans are. I know the whole drama with the fans is that they're not liking Phil Dos Santos with the team. So, but Phil Dos Santos is still staying with Valor FC, and it does question of the roster who they're going to get for the next season. It does really question how Valor FC is uh, managing for this team.
Yeah, they've got a lot of work to do, Jacob, no doubt about it. Again, their big issue, like Atletico Ottawa, is scoring goals. They had a lot of injuries last year. Andrew Jean-Baptiste, their best centre-back, Raphael Ohin, one of their best midfielders, barely played at all. Ohin just played one game, then got beaten that aforementioned game that you mentioned against TSS Rovers, and never played again for the season. He's played one game in the league in 2 years. So that didn't help when you have a thin squad and you lose two of the players like that. But they need goal scorers. You mentioned Hundal. Maybe he goes there. Who knows? But they need to get players who can score goals. And, I think I looked at the numbers. They played 28 games last year. And in 22 of the 28 games, they scored one goal or less. You're not going to win many games like that.
Yeah, it's not really a good look. It's not really a good look for Valor FC. It's like you're seeing FC Edmonton how they performed, or for example, Atletico Ottawa, that they came last place, and it's not a good look for Valor FC. It's now you try to look who they could sign for their team.
Yeah, it's gonna be tough. It's gonna be tough. I mean, Philip Dos Santos is gonna have to work his connections and get better players in.
And I hope this whole team gets a good at managing of signing players. It's where a place has a big stadium, which IG Field, which the capacity of 33,000, but it lower than that for games, and it has to get better in this managing. I hope that Valor FC upcoming season will be better. And as noticed, Kristian Jack, it's not a good look from this season. It's always this feeling that hoping the upcoming seasons, or maybe the next 2 seasons, or maybe 5 years, will accordingly be better. But it won't look better when expansion teams come in, which I know they're looking for in 2025 and 2026, which I know the commissioner said that there's no expansion teams for 2024. And I think 2024 for Valor FC might be the time that it has to be a playoff spot to find.
I agree. It's time, right? The Winnipeg fans deserve it, and they'll feel like they felt last year they were a playoff team, and they obviously got that wrong, and they've got to keep core players there, and now's the time for them to deliver.
And I know that the commissioner is looking for Quebec for the next years, and I think Valor is on the clock for trying to find good players. But and I hope Valor FC is gonna do well for it and come back in the top 4, or maybe you would say 5, because that's the that's the playoff spots. But some fans don't like the five slots for the playoff seats, but I think fans will get into that playoff structure.
Yeah,
So,
I love the playoff format. I love it in so many ways. The percentage of 5 versus 8 is the same percentage as the ones with that allow the amount of teams in Major League Soccer. Ultimately, the 5th team has to win 4 away games to actually come close to winning the trophy. It's very unlikely. It keeps people more competitive. It fuels a more competitive regular season where every game matters, and that's ultimately the I think the key barometer in all of this.
So hoping that the next season is going to be better for the Canadian Premier League, and that's full time for the Red Leaf Card. I'm your host Jacob, subbing out.